Good morning, students. In our last class, we discussed how the protagonist of the novel, Mr. Mohan Biswas, marries a girl from the Tulsi family, a very renowned family of the town, and he starts living with the family of her wife. But this does not mean that he is willing to lose his freedom and independence. When one of his brother-in-law suggests that he leave sign painting and become a driver for the Tulsi estate, Mr. Biswas immediately voices his dissent. Students, the next section of the novel, entitled The Chase, shows that Mr. Biswas begins his independent life with Sharma. From the beginning, Mr. Biswas has the feeling that in Chase he is an unnecessary and unwanted man, and that real life was to begin from them soon and elsewhere. To Mr. Biswas, Chase was a pause, a preparation. Here, the novelist identifies the desire of Mr. Biswas to have a house of his own, while also acknowledging the problem of alienation among displaced people. Mr. Biswas thinks that life in Chase will help him discover his own identity, but it is the sense of isolation that looms large, and he fails to find his authentic selfhood. He discovers that he wants to have his own identity among East Indians. Mr. Biswas now feels that despite hostility, he is recognized as a mimic man in Hanuman house. At Chase, he feels alienated. What Naipaul seeks to convey is that a person's social identity depends on the society to which he belongs, and that the family is sustaining and stabilizing experience for marginalized individuals like Mr. Biswas. For the protagonist, life is meaningless without Sharma, his children, and even the Tulsis. This makes Mr. Biswas' visit to Hanuman house more frequent. Life at Greenvale is a more distressing experience for the protagonist. After the spacious accommodation in Chase, the single room into which he moves with family and furniture leaves him feeling suffocated. Although Greenvale gives him a sense of freedom and importance, especially on Saturdays when the wages are distributed, his actions in Greenvale are motivated by excessive insecurity, both physically and mentally. Here, his dream to build a house begins to take shape. And we see that it is not that he wants a spacious place for himself, but he wants to be recognized as the father of his children, especially by his son Anand. For Mr. Biswas, Anand belonged completely to Tulsis. Mr. Biswas' first attempt to claim a portion of the earth fails. This dream to build a house meets the same result as the doll's house had given to Savi, daughter of Mr. Biswas, on her birthday. His wife, Sharma, had to break the house in order to quell the anger of the Tulsis and to satisfy their ego. Somehow, he starts building his own house in Greenvale, but it is nowhere near the house of his dream. Mr. Biswas moves into the finished rooms of his house thinking that the house is going to bring a changed state of mind, but the intensity of alienation and displacement continues, and here too he fails to gain acceptance as an individual. Students, the second part of the novel focuses on Port of Spain, a place that opens new avenues for Mr. Biswas. The city provides him with opportunities to establish himself professionally, something he has long searched for. He becomes a reporter for the Trinidad Sentinel with a salary of $15 a month, a job that helps him earn some respect from the Tulsis too. Now he is not a troublemaker anymore to Mrs. Tulsi. When she offers him 2 rooms in her house in Port of Spain, he readily accepts. He is not a non-entity anymore. Shama, on his visit to Hanuman house, is able to assert proudly that the children are afraid of him. His relations with Mrs. Tulsi gradually improve. There is no hostility from either side. For the time being, he forgets his wish to have a space of his own and enjoys his success and family life. His happiness, however, is short lived. The takeover of the Trinidad Sentinel by new authorities, Said's breakup with the Tulsis, and Mrs. Tulsi's decision to live in Shardil all come as a blow, upsetting the family hierarchy upon which the Tulsi family has used to run. Though the family hierarchy of the Tulsis, Naipal tries to portray the typical Indian joint family where authority of senior member are absolute. And he has somewhat he has done it successfully as well. There's absence of this authority, the final authority, the head of the family, means disintegration of the family as well. Here to the Tulsi family, the disturbance of this hierarchy due to the absence of Seth and Mrs. Tulsi leads to dissension and disunity in the family. Instead of cooperation, a competition between Mr. Biswas's son Anand and Govind's son Vidyadhar starts. Mr. Biswas' ambition to have a house resurfaces after his shift to Short Hill. He has exhausted all his saving to build the house there, but the house is not conveniently situated. Shama has to walk a mile daily for shopping, and there is also a problem of transportation. The children too want to return to Port of Spain. Even though the house is not the house of his dream, it helps him realize his responsibility as a father and husband. The house for Mr. Biswas is more of a prison as it is situated far from the city. For Mr. Biswas could not simply leave the house in Short Hill, he had to be released from it. Thus, when Mrs. Tulsi offers him 2 rooms in Port of Spain, he readily accepts the offer, knowing that he has to share the house with Govind and Tetel. After coming back to ports of Spain, he finds people in a better economic position. Their money is shown in Tetel and Govind's suit, for example. But for Mr. Biswas, his fortune remains the same. The domestic situation also improves after the return of Ovid, a calm that remains short-lived. The reader may find a change in Mr. Biswas's attitude towards having a house. Earlier, the house was expected to lead to a discovery of his authentic selfhood and a proclamation of his identity. This time, owning a house comes out of the humiliation inflicted on his son and Mr. Biswas's helplessness to protect his family. At that point, the house will be on a piece of land where he and his family can live with self-respect and dignity. Even his wife Shama agrees to leave the house, although she earlier advocated living with the Tulsi family, saying, "I don't want anything bigger. This is just right for me, something small and nice." Mr. Biswas manages to get a loan from Ajoda and buys a house in Port of Spain. He describes his house. The sun came through the open window on the ground floor and struck the kitchen wall. Woodwork and frosted glass were hot to touch. Later, Mr. Biswas discovers many flaws in the house, but the sense of satisfaction that he owns a house is there. To conclude today's lecture, students, Naipaul seems to suggest that displaced people like Mr. Biswas owning a house is not just a matter getting a shelter from the heat, cold or rain. In fact, it is both an imposition of order and a carving out of authentic selfhood within the heterogeneous and fragmented society of Trinidad. The novel portrays Mr. Biswas as a man who stays put struggling against the hostile environment instead of running away from it. Students, this much for today. Thank you very much.